On the old cobblestone streets of the coastal town of Astoria, Oregon, there stood a quaint little place known as the Rosewood Cafe. Every Monday morning, the soft jingle of the doorbell signaled the arrival of Isabel Moore, a 28-year-old woman with neatly tied brown hair and shoes worn thin from years of waiting tables. Isabel didn't stand out in a crowd. She lived quietly in a small rented house just behind the cafe with her younger brother, 10 years her junior. Their mother had passed away from heart disease 3 years ago. Their father, a blues musician who played on street corners, had disappeared when Isabel was still in 4th grade. Since then, she had become more than just a sister. She was a mother figure, a provider, and the heart that kept their modest home warm. Before we continue with Isabel's remarkable journey, if you believe that a person's worth is not measured by their appearance or circumstances, but by their resilience and unwavering passion, then don't forget to like and subscribe to our channel. That way we can keep sharing stories that inspire. Now back to the story, where many surprises are yet to come. Mornings at Rosewood Cafe moved gently, like the tide brushing the Oregon shore. Regular customers gathered at the rustic wooden tables, sipping coffee and flipping through newspapers. Old George, a retired sailor with silver hair and sea-worn hands, often chuckled, "That girl's got warm hands and a voice like autumn." Few knew the truth. Before she was a waitress, Isabel had a dream, to become a singer. As a child, she sang in church, her voice raw but full of feeling. She even won first place in a county talent show. Her voice, though untrained, was pure emotion. Once when she sang the opening lines of Amazing Grace, her mother had wept quietly in the front row. But when her mother fell ill, Isabel left music school behind. She began working full-time to support her family. Slowly, her dream was folded away, like the half-finished embroidered handkerchief her mother had left in an old memory box. Then, on a cold March afternoon, her best friend Rachel Mendes, a bright-eyed event coordinator, burst into the cafe. "Belle, come with me to the fundraising gala tomorrow night, will you?" she said, her eyes gleaming with excitement. "It's at the Astoria Bay Hotel. Wear whatever you like, just be there." "A gala?" Isabel laughed, brushing flour from her apron. "I don't even own proper shoes." "You don't need to be fashionable," Rachel said, grabbing her hand. "I just need someone close by. People at these events can be chilly." And so, the next evening, Isabel stood in the grand lobby of the Astoria Bay Hotel, where crystal chandeliers glowed with warm golden light, reflecting off elegant gowns and polished shoes. She wore a simple navy blue dress, her hair pulled into a low bun, and borrowed shoes from Rachel. Holding a glass of water, she kept to the wall, trying not to get lost in the swirl of laughter and business cards. The evening went smoothly, until the MC stepped on stage with an unexpected announcement. "Ladies and gentlemen, I regret to inform you that tonight's guest performer will not be joining us due to a delayed flight." A low wave of murmurs spread through the room. Some guests sighed in disappointment, others shook their heads. Then a slightly tipsy man stood up and called out, laughing, "Why don't we let someone here sing instead? An impromptu show, just for fun," laughter echoed from a group of women nearby. One of them pointed toward Isabel. "Hey, that shy little waitress over there, let her sing. It'll be fun." All eyes turned. Rachel stepped forward, ready to defend her friend, but Isabel gently rested a hand on her arm. "It's okay," she said softly, not embarrassed, just calm, centered. "If they want to hear, I'll sing." What some had meant as a harmless joke had unknowingly awakened something in Isabel. Something she believed had long since faded. She stepped onto the stage under hundreds of eyes, some curious, some amused, and some glinting with quiet ridicule. She wore no gown, no glittering jewelry, no headset mic, no backing track, just a young woman beneath the lights, standing still with nothing in her hands but her own quiet courage. The MC hesitated for a moment, then spoke. "Let's give a warm round of applause for Miss Isabel." A few polite claps followed. Some guests pulled out their phones, expecting a clumsy performance to cap off the night. "She looks more like a last-minute karaoke filler than a singer," someone whispered nearby. The words pricked Isabel's ears like thorns, but she closed her eyes, drew in a deep breath, and began. "I heard there was a secret chord." With just that one line, the room fell silent. There was no music, no applause, just her voice, clear, sincere, and unadorned. Each word resonated from somewhere deep within, as if every note had been drawn from a place she'd locked away long ago. Her voice carried a tapestry of memories, the grief of losing her mother, the long nights spent baking into the quiet hours, the sound of her younger brother's cough from a stubborn cold, and the simple dinners of stale bread and watery soup. It went like this the fourth, the fifth. Each note weaving through the room, a man paused mid-sip of his wine, eyes locked on her in thoughtful silence. A middle-aged woman froze, hand midway to her coat. A young man who had been jotting notes stopped and simply listened. With every word, Isabel's voice grew stronger, not in flawless technique, but in raw emotional clarity. This wasn't a performance. It was a story told from the heart, a story no one could have guessed from her quiet, unassuming face. When she reached the final verse, "And even though it all went wrong, I'll stand before the Lord of Song with nothing on my tongue but hallelujah," there was no hint of mockery left in the room. A deep, reverent silence stretched on. Then came the applause, not thunderous or wild, but sincere and full of respect. One person stood, then another, until the entire ballroom rose together, giving Isabel a standing ovation, the kind that seasoned performers rarely receive. Rachel, standing just off stage, covered her mouth, tears glistening in her eyes. The man who had laughed earlier now stood frozen, face flushed, utterly speechless. Isabel gave a gentle bow, saying nothing. She stepped down from the stage, hands clutching the fabric of her dress as if afraid to let go, afraid to wake from what felt like a dream. Backstage, a silver-haired woman wearing glasses and a dark velvet dress approached her. "You're Isabel, correct?" the woman asked, her voice soft but serious. Isabel nodded cautiously. "Yes, I just sang because no one else could." The woman extended her hand, her eyes warm and discerning. "I'm Margot Levinson, Director of Community Music Programs at the Seattle Philharmonic. I was in the audience, and I believe next time the audience should know ahead of time what they're about to witness." Isabel stood frozen. Rachel came up and placed a gentle hand on her back. "You did it, Belle," Rachel whispered, and this time the whole world heard. 3 days after the gala, Isabel hadn't quite recovered from the whirlwind. She still woke early at 5 a.m. tied on her apron, and served coffee at the Rosewood Cafe just like before. The difference was in the way people looked at her now, smiling a little longer, a little warmer. Some whispered, "I heard you sang at the gala. You were wonderful." An elderly woman who usually ordered chamomile tea handed her a small silver hair clip. "It belonged to my daughter," she said softly. "She once dreamed of becoming a singer, too. I think she'd want you to have it." But even as those around her changed, Isabel felt the same inside. Still uncertain, still searching. That afternoon, just as she finished washing the last tray of pastries, Rachel burst into the cafe, eyes practically glowing with excitement. "Belle, you won't believe this. They actually sent the Margot Levinson from the Seattle Philharmonic. She wants you to join a summer training program, the Folk Voice Discovery Project. Only 6 people are selected from the entire state. And get this, you don't even need to audition. You're already enough." Isabel said nothing, not because she wasn't happy, but because she couldn't quite believe it. "Rachel, I've never studied voice. I can't read sheet music. I don't even know whether I'm supposed to sing using my chest or my diaphragm." Rachel squeezed her hand gently. "That's exactly why they want you. They want a real voice, one that hasn't been polished by technique until it loses its soul." That afternoon, Isabel walked alone along the coastal embankment, the very place where she used to sit with her mother as a child. The sea stretched out before her, the same salty, distant, unknowable expanse it had always been, just like her future. Inside her, joy and fear swirled together. All her life, Isabel had only known endurance. She'd never allowed herself to dream too big. But then she remembered her mother's eyes, the way she once looked at her, whispering, "You have a voice like the first sunshine of summer, Belle. One day the world will stop to listen." And with that, Isabel whispered back, "Yes." Isabel stepped into the Seattle Music Center, a sprawling, modern glass building by Lake Union where the sunset shimmered off the water like scattered crystals. On her back was a worn backpack, in her hands, a paper bag holding 2 egg sandwiches she had made that morning. Her heart pounded just as fiercely as it had on the gala stage. "Isabel Moore, right?" came a voice from behind. She turned to see a young blonde woman with softly curled hair, wearing a cream cashmere coat and polished Italian leather shoes. "I'm Natalie Rivers from Juilliard. Also in this year's training group. I heard you made quite a splash at some charity gala." Isabel gave a shy smile. "I just sang a folk song. Didn't think folk singers got picked these days." Natalie shrugged and walked briskly into the lobby. Her tone wasn't unkind, but it carried an unmistakable weight. During the first orientation session, Isabel sat quietly, scribbling notes in a small notebook. The others, students from prestigious music conservatories, chattered about vibrato, falsetto, breath control, and using bel canto technique. They spoke like these were secret passwords unlocking musical doors Isabel had never seen. The first class was about emotional expression through sound. Margot, the silver-haired woman from the Gala, led the session. She didn't look at Isabel once during the hour, but as it ended, she quietly approached and said, "Don't let what you haven't learned overshadow what you already have." Isabel smiled for the first time that day. By the third day, the trainees were given an assignment: perform a song without preparation. No backing track, no support, just themselves on stage. Isabel planned to choose a well-known tune, but when her turn came, she instinctively began singing Wayfaring Stranger, the lullaby her mother used to hum walking home from late shifts. She stood there without music or refined technique, but each line carried the weight of generations: the poor, the humble, the quietly enduring. When she finished, no one spoke. Then Margot stood up, not clapping, but placing a hand over her chest and saying simply, "She didn't come here to perform. She came to remind us why music matters." Isabel stepped down from the stage, hands trembling, but inside her, for the first time in years, there was no self-doubt. Just a quiet, fragile belief maybe she truly belonged here. Saturday night. Rainier Hall glowed under golden lights, filled with the scent of expensive perfume. It was the closing performance of the summer training program. A night not just for students, but for music producers, record label reps, journalists, and major donors of the Seattle Philharmonic. Backstage, Isabel stood quietly before a mirror, clutching tightly a folded piece of paper in her dress pocket. It held the lyrics to the song she would perform, an old folk tune called Wild Mountain Thyme, one her mother used to sing while slicing bread in the kitchen, humming as she wiped her hands. Isabel stepped into the Seattle Music Center, a sprawling, modern glass building by Lake Union where the sunset shimmered off the water like scattered crystals. On her back was a worn backpack, in her hands, a paper bag holding 2 egg sandwiches she had made that morning. Her heart pounded just as fiercely as it had on the gala stage. "Isabel Moore." "Right," came a voice from behind. She turned to see a young blonde woman with softly curled hair, wearing a cream cashmere coat and polished Italian leather shoes. "I'm Natalie Rivers from Juilliard. Also in this year's training group. I heard you made quite a splash at some charity gala." Isabel gave a shy smile. "I just sang a folk song. Didn't think folk singers got picked these days." Natalie shrugged and walked briskly into the lobby. Her tone wasn't unkind, but it carried an unmistakable weight. During the first orientation session, Isabel sat quietly, scribbling notes in a small notebook. The others, students from prestigious music conservatories, chattered about vibrato, falsetto, breath control, and using bel canto technique. They spoke like these were secret passwords unlocking musical doors Isabel had never seen. The first class was about emotional expression through sound. Margot, the silver-haired woman from the Gala, led the session. She didn't look at Isabel once during the hour, but as it ended, she quietly approached and said, "Don't let what you haven't learned overshadow what you already have." Isabel smiled for the first time that day. By the third day, the trainees were given an assignment: perform a song without preparation. No backing track, no support, just themselves on stage. Isabel planned to choose a well-known tune, but when her turn came, she instinctively began singing Wayfaring Stranger, the lullaby her mother used to hum walking home from late shifts. She stood there without music or refined technique, but each line carried the weight of generations: the poor, the humble, the quietly enduring. When she finished, no one spoke. Then Margot stood up, not clapping, but placing a hand over her chest and saying simply, "She didn't come here to perform. She came to remind us why music matters." Isabel stepped down from the stage, hands trembling, but inside her, for the first time in years, there was no self-doubt. Just a quiet, fragile belief maybe she truly belonged here. Saturday night. Rainier Hall glowed under golden lights, filled with the scent of expensive perfume. It was the closing performance of the summer training program, a night not just for students, but for music producers, record label reps, journalists, and major donors of the Seattle Philharmonic. Backstage, Isabel stood quietly before a mirror, clutching tightly a folded piece of paper in her dress pocket. It held the lyrics to the song she would perform, an old folk tune called Wild Mountain Thyme, one her mother used to sing while slicing bread in the kitchen, humming as she wiped her hands. She sang the final line as softly as a farewell from a distant land, and we'll all go together. The entire hall fell into an unforced silence. No whispering, no clicking of camera shutters, just a space filled with hearts quietly beating in unison to the rhythm of sincerity, simplicity, and pure emotion. When she bowed her head, the applause erupted. It wasn't loud or raucous like the performances before. It was an applause born of respect, from people who had lived long enough to understand that some things, though simple, are irreplaceable. Isabel stood there, the spotlight shining on her sweat, dappled but calm face. In that moment, she was no longer the girl mocked at the gala, no longer the shy waitress who shrank from crowds. She was Isabel Moore, an unassuming woman carrying a trove of gentle sound the world had long forgotten to listen for. As her performance ended, a tall man in a black suit stepped backstage. On his jacket, a name badge read Thomas Avery, executive producer. American Soul National Vocal Showcase. Excuse me, he said as Isabel sipped water. I don't know who you are, but I know your voice doesn't belong only to small recital halls. I want you on next season's show. And don't worry, we're not looking for polished copies. We're looking for something real. Isabel looked at him, her heart pounding. She didn't know what lay ahead, but in this moment she knew one thing. The dream she had folded away for so many years was finally opening page by page, as gently as the song she had just sung. One early autumn morning, with a light fog still clinging to the windows of Rosewood Cafe, Isabel sat at her usual corner table. In front of her was a steaming cup of chamomile tea, a broken piece of biscuit, and a thick ivory-colored envelope with the words, American Soul New York Studio, printed on it. Rachel sat across from her, eyes bright but calm. Plane ticket, hotel, shooting schedule. They're taking care of everything. You just need to bring one thing. Isabel smiled. My voice. Rachel shook her head gently. Your heart. They've got more than enough voices already. People who can sing abound. But what's rare, what the world truly needs, is someone who can make an entire room fall silent. Isabel thought about this as she gazed out the window, watching the maple leaves slowly turn from green to a warm, amber gold. The cool autumn breeze whispered memories through the branches, carrying her back to evenings long past. She remembered those quiet nights with her mother, when the power had gone out, leaving their small home wrapped in darkness. They would sit close by the old fireplace, sharing half a loaf of crusty bread, the warmth from the flames soft against their skin. No stage lights, no microphones. Just a mother and daughter, weaving ancient melodies into the stillness, their voices intertwined like a gentle river, fragile, tender, but unyielding. Music, Isabel realized, was what remained when everything else was gone. It was the last thread that tied her to her mother, to the home they had lost, and to the dreams she had tucked away deep inside her heart. 3 days later, Isabel found herself boarding the first flight of her life. She was wearing a borrowed coat from a kind neighbor, clutching a weathered suitcase and the notebook she had carried for years. A battered journal filled with song lyrics, fragments of poems, and the whispered stories her mother had told her. Every word, every melody. A piece of her past she wasn't ready to let go of. Landing in New York was like stepping into a different world. The city was a whirlwind of noise and motion. Neon lights flashing like stars brought to earth, and crowds of people rushing by with purpose. Some spoke into earpieces, others applied makeup in hurried hallways, and the hum of technology was everywhere, microphones being adjusted in elevators, cameras rolling in studios. It was overwhelming, too bright, too fast. Isabel tried to steady her breathing, tried to smile, but beneath it all, a familiar knot of fear twisted in her stomach. I don't belong here, she told herself. She felt like a small boat caught in a storm adrift among sleek yachts and towering cruise ships. But then came the audition. No audience, no applause, just a cold room with glaring white lights, a row of cameras, and 3 judges seated behind a long table. The air was thick with anticipation. A young man in a gray suit looked at her expectantly and asked, "What will you be singing?" Isabel's fingers brushed the delicate floral pendant at her neck, the only gift her mother had ever given her for her 18th birthday. She closed her eyes for a moment, breathing in the memory of her mother's warmth and love. Almost instinctively, she answered, "You are my sunshine." The judges exchanged glances, their expressions unreadable. It was such a simple, familiar song, one that carried no grand flourishes or complex techniques. But when Isabel began to sing, something shifted. Her voice didn't soar or shimmer like the polished performers she had heard in the city. It was raw and honest, trembling with the weight of every unheard prayer and unspoken hope she had carried inside her. She sang not to win approval, but for every mother whose lullabies had been forgotten, for every girl who had been told to be quiet, for every dream that had been pushed aside but still glowed softly in the dark. As she sang the final line, "Please don't take my sunshine away," the room fell completely silent. The cameraman lowered his rig, no longer capturing a performance but a moment of pure truth. The oldest female judge gently wiped her glasses, her eyes shining with unshed tears. For a few suspended seconds, no one spoke. Then the man in the center leaned forward, his voice quiet but filled with conviction. "This," he said slowly, "is exactly why you're here." Isabel opened her eyes, heart pounding but filled with a calm she had never known before. The fear and self-doubt that had shadowed her for so long began to melt away, replaced by a quiet confidence. In that instant, she understood. Music was never about perfection or applause. It was about connection, about telling the stories that no one else could tell, about holding on to memories and emotions, like a flickering flame that refused to be extinguished. And after all those years of silence, Isabel's voice, her true voice, was finally ready to be heard. The youngest judge leaned forward, eyes warm and steady. "Isabel," she said gently, "you don't need to sing another song. We've heard all we need to hear." 2 months later, the premiere broadcast of American Soul aired across the United States. Isabel Moore appeared on screen without makeup, without an evening gown, without any flashy tricks. She was simply herself, a quiet woman with a voice that reached deep into the heart. Suddenly, she became a phenomenon. But strangely, no one called her the new star. Instead, they called her the voice that feels like home. Articles poured in, some hailing her as the revival of America's folk soul, others comparing her to a modern-day Joan Baez. But Isabel didn't care much for titles or comparisons. After every taping, she would call her younger brother. Their conversations were simple, filled with her quiet pride. "I sang with all my heart today," she'd say, her voice soft but certain. And her brother would smile over the phone, knowing that was all that mattered. Then came the night of the finals. Isabel asked the producers if she could sing a song not on the nomination list. They hesitated but finally agreed, curious about what she would choose. That evening, on national television, before millions of viewers, Isabel stepped onto the stage. She wore an old ivory linen dress, her hair tied loosely with a pale blue ribbon, the same ribbon her mother had worn. There were no spotlights shining down, no backup dancers swirling around her, just a single standing microphone and a long, quiet pause that held the entire room still. Then she began to sing, "Oh, the summertime is coming." The room seemed to hold its breath. She sang the song she once performed at Ryanier Hall, but this time it was different. It wasn't for a scholarship or cameras. It was for herself, for the memory of her mother, for the love and loss that had shaped her. When she reached the final line, she looked up, as if speaking directly to someone no longer in this world. "Will you go, lassie, go?" No one stood up immediately. Instead, the audience wiped away tears, overwhelmed by the raw, aching beauty of her voice and the truth in her song. After that performance, Isabel stepped quietly away from the spotlight. She declined major studio offers and refused long-term contracts. Instead, she returned to Oregon. There, she opened a small singing class for children in the very same old church where she had first found her voice. Outside, a wooden sign hung gently swaying in the breeze. It read, "Sometimes it's not the loudest voice that makes us listen, but the truest heart." And so, the story of Isabel Moore came to a close. Once a simple woman mocked, now a voice that left the world speechless. If this journey touched your heart, please like and subscribe to our channel. It gives us the strength to keep sharing heartfelt, emotional, and inspiring stories just like this one. See you again on the next journey.